Thank you, Tanveer, for organizing this and asking me to be here. Others have also talked about how in the last 1 year we have lost several thinkers, sociologists and other colleagues. I think Professor Nandu Ram's name has not been mentioned. I think that was also a very, very big loss. And then Professor Andre Bitte and Professor Oommen now. Apart from that, I think the last week we also lost Professor Panikar, very major historian. So obviously, these are times not that they have died young, they have lived their life, they have made their contributions, and we are here partly because of them, the institutions they set up, they built. I was not a JNU student, so I don't have the kind of fear or kind of that image of Professor Oommen. I was his colleague very briefly. I mean, when I joined, he was there. He was also perhaps in my selection committee, I don't remember clearly. But then in a kind of year or so, his retirement came, and during that period, we did have some interaction. We went to his house, they came to our house, he and his wife and the dog. So, but otherwise, I'm not really the right person to say much about him. About his personal life, only one thing that I would say, that even though he was perhaps one of the most published scholar in the department or even otherwise among the sociology community, what I remember is that he was never satisfied with himself. He always said that, people don't really take me seriously. He wanted to do much more, and I think that's something which perhaps all of us, the spirit we should have, that there is a lot to learn, and that's what Maitrayee was saying, that he kept struggling and trying to find something new. And again, as Maitrayee was saying, he gave attention. He always was curious about what I was doing, and people told me that, so Oommen was inquiring about you. He was asking what has he published recently. He was kind of keeping track of every colleague, that, what are we up to, even though, I was not close to him. I was not really directly engaging with his work. Very briefly, a few things that I would like to say. Again, Professor Khaka has already mentioned, we don't talk about his early work, which was very important work in some sense on land reforms, Vinoba Bhave's movement, Bhudanand movement, and how it was a failure. I remember that was one of the first things that I read on agrarian studies, and it was very interesting kind of qualitative empirical work, and he showed how the land that kind of people gave as daan was in the middle of a big plot of a big landlord, so it could never be allotted to anyone else. How it was. So he actually went and studied, and he had several papers on rural development, rural society, and various aspects of it. I think there's another important thing about both perhaps Professor Oommen as well as Professor Yogendra Singh, and to some extent also sociology at JNU, that at some level took sociology away from the earlier tradition of social anthropology. And people often compare Delhi School with JNU. Delhi School was largely embedded in social anthropological traditions, and people like Professor Oommen and Yogendra Singh and others, in some sense, tried to experiment with new things. And they were not really, in some sense, hesitant to kind of bring ideas from elsewhere. And in some sense, what Professor Mukherjee has said, or Professor Patnaik was saying earlier, they also did not immediately join the mainstream. They were not really worried about disagreeing with the historians, with the powerful Marxist thinking on the campus. And Professor Oommen, for example, the idea of ethnicity, again, historians would talk only in the language of communalism, and his idea of nation and India not being a nation state, it's only a nation state, but not being a nation, it was a nation of nations. And these were very interesting ideas. And so he kind of, at some level, had the courage to raise questions which were of the time in a language which was, again, not the mainstream academic language of JNU. And so you're confronting at various levels, and your colleagues are also saying that this is not really the way you should talk about ethnic conflicts, because it gives them legitimacy, and we as scholars, we should not do that. And these are discussions I have myself heard, not through Professor Oommen, but otherwise, when one is talking about, there were times when Punjab was in crisis, Northeast was in crisis, Hindutva had not really come up, but there were regular, issues of nationalism, and there was a nationalist consensus in which left was also embedded. And they had the courage, Professor Oommen had the courage, not everyone perhaps had the courage to kind of stand on the margin and say things differently. And likewise, I think bringing categories from outside, bringing questions of history and questions of identity, which again was not really something that sociologists talked about, and earlier mentioned question of social exclusions. And I think this is what perhaps may help people like Professor Oommen to kind of take sociology to also a platform of policy. And sociology was not something that was simply a question of trying to understand what was happening on ground and kind of being a critical observer, but it was also something that needed to be critically and actively engaged with, which was obviously JNU was doing quite a lot. Even people like M.N. Srinivas wanted to be on the planning commission, and they also consulted planning commission occasionally, but their sociology was always, or their anthropology or social anthropology was kept away from questions of policy. They would go and study the village or whatever they were looking at, caste in a different way. And so Oommen didn't hesitate even for a minute to jump into policy discussions, policy questions. Sachar committee was obviously a very, very important contribution, and without, I think, a sociological lens, Sachar committee would not have become so critical and so significant as it became. So I think Professor Oommen has done his work, and now it's for the next generation, which was like also has been doing our work, but still I think the following generation has to take that further, and times are much more difficult. I think social sciences were much more comfortable when people like Professor Oommen came to sociology or to JNU. There was a lot of, in some sense, authority in position of professor. There was also a lot of money available. There were lots of students, colleagues also, and things are perhaps much more difficult today. And I think, but still, we need to pursue that we are basically critical thinkers, and we engage with empirical. We also say things which have policy implications. We talk about exclusions. We talk about inequalities. And all of us are interested in making India a good society or world a good society, and kind of giving some better space to humanity. Thank you so much.